The bus lurched to a stop, throwing Vera Jacobs forward. She braced herself, gripping the faded leather strap above her head, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. The hum of the engine died down as the doors creaked open, and the dry, sticky heat of Charleston, South Carolina hit her face like a slap. The air outside was thick, suffocating, but to Vera it felt like a breath of fresh air. She stepped off the bus, the soles of her shoes hitting the cracked sidewalk with a sound that felt unfamiliar. It had been 20 years. 20 years of silence, of concrete walls and iron bars. She had been locked away for a crime she didn't commit, her life stolen by a system that had written her off as guilty before she even had a chance to speak. Now at 72, the years had worn on her. Her once sharp eyes were clouded, and her body felt like it belonged to someone else. The arthritis in her knees creaked as she walked each step, reminding her that the prison walls might have been gone, but they had left their mark on her. She stood for a moment, taking in the street. The small, sleepy town of Charleston had changed. New buildings stood where old shops had once been. The small family-owned restaurants she remembered from her youth had been replaced by chain stores. The rhythm of the town was still there, but it felt offbeat, foreign. But one thing had remained: her house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked down the street, searching for the familiar sight of the white two-story house with the wraparound porch, the house where she had spent nearly her entire life. The house that had been her grandmother's, her mother's, and then finally hers. It had been the one constant in a life that had been anything but. "Maybe it hasn't changed," she whispered to herself, willing the house to appear as it once had, safe, familiar, untouched by time. But the reality of the moment crashed over her like a wave. She could see it now at the end of the block, the house in the distance. But something was wrong. A car was parked in the driveway, a sleek, modern minivan that didn't belong. The yard, once full of wildflowers and Robert's garden, was now cluttered with plastic toys scattered across the grass. Her breath caught in her throat. What was this? Who was this? As she walked closer, the familiar feeling of dread settled over her. There was a woman sitting on the porch, young, maybe in her 30s. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she was cradling a cup of coffee, looking out at the street with a blank expression. Vera's feet moved almost on their own, each step pulling her closer to the house she had lost. Her heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears as she approached the porch. The woman glanced up at her, confusion flickering in her eyes. Then slowly, a polite smile spread across her face, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice soft but guarded. Vera stopped at the edge of the porch, her hands trembling at her sides. The sight of this stranger on her doorstep, someone living in her home, in her memories, was too much to bear. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. How could she? The words felt foreign, caught in her throat. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "This is my house," she said, her tone sharp but shaky. "I'm Vera Jacobs. This is my home." The woman's smile faltered, and she stood up slowly, taking a step toward Vera. "I'm sorry, but we've lived here for 16 years. This house was sold to us by a woman named Diane Hartley. She said it had been abandoned, that the original owner was no longer here." Vera's stomach dropped and her world tilted. Diane Hartley. The name rang in her ears like a gunshot. Diane, her sister, her flesh and blood, had sold her home. Not only that, but she had claimed Vera was dead. Dead and gone, erased from the world, while Diane took everything that belonged to her. "No," Vera whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No. There's been a mistake. This is my house. I've been away for a long time, but this was supposed to be waiting for me." The woman, Maggie Turner, as Vera would later learn, took a step back, a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. I'm sorry, Maggie said, her voice softening. But it's true. We've lived here for years. We have the deed, the paperwork. She paused, glancing back at the house as though she too was trying to make sense of the situation. I don't know what happened, but I don't think you're supposed to be here. Vera's chest tightened. This was happening. It was real. The house that had been a sanctuary, a place of love and family, had been taken from her. Her sister, the one person she had trusted more than anyone, had betrayed her. And now this stranger, Maggie Turner, was standing in the house that had once been hers, living the life Vera had imagined for herself, if only she hadn't been thrown into prison. For a moment, Vera stood frozen, unable to move. The world she had once known had shifted. Her memories, her past, all of it was being ripped away in front of her, and all she could do was watch. I'm sorry, Vera said the words, barely a whisper, the weight of them crushing her. I didn't know. You... Maggie looked at her with a mix of confusion and concern. I'm sorry, I really am. But I think you should come inside. We can talk, figure this out. Maybe we can get to the bottom of it. Vera nodded, her mind racing. It was clear Maggie didn't know the full story. She didn't know the pain Vera had endured, the years locked away, the betrayal by the one person she had trusted. Vera had spent 20 years behind bars for a crime she hadn't committed. But the real crime, the one that had been silently eating away at her soul, was the loss of everything she had ever cared about. The porch was as she remembered, but the feeling of comfort had long since faded. As she stepped inside the house, her gaze swept over the familiar walls, now adorned with things that weren't hers. Pictures of a family she had never known, decor that felt foreign, out of place. The house was still standing, but it was no longer hers. I'll explain, Maggie said gently, leading Vera into the living room. We'll sort this out. But Vera wasn't sure anymore. She wasn't sure if there was anything to sort out, or if the life she had once known had been completely erased, stolen by the one person who should have protected her. And so, with no clear answers and no comfort, Vera sat down, feeling the weight of the years pressing on her chest, and wondered what it all meant now. Vera sat across from Maggie Turner, the weight of the situation sinking in. The walls of the living room were too white, too sterile. The comfortable warmth she had once known here, Robert's worn leather armchair by the window, the photos of their life together on the mantel, was gone. It had all been replaced by unfamiliar faces, new furniture, and a vague sense of disorientation. Vera's eyes scanned the room, but she couldn't make sense of what had happened. She had spent 20 years in prison, wrongly convicted, but the worst part wasn't the physical punishment. It was the betrayal of her family. The home she had once shared with Robert, the place that had been her sanctuary, had now become a place of strangers. Maggie's voice broke through Vera's thoughts. I know this must be a lot to take in, Maggie said gently, her hands folded in her lap. But we really did buy this house fair and square. Diane Hartley, the woman who sold it to us, said she was just looking to get rid of it. She was emotional, said it held too many memories for her, so she just wanted to move on. Maggie paused. We didn't know you were still alive. Vera's breath hitched in her throat, the sting of those words cutting deeper than she expected. She had always thought of this house as a place where time stood still, where things would wait for her. But now it seemed as if even the memory of her had been wiped away, replaced by a woman who had stolen what was rightfully hers. Diane had erased her completely. Diane lied to you. Vera said the words heavy with disbelief. She said I was dead. Maggie nodded, her expression softening. She gave us all the paperwork. The deed, the insurance papers, and even a death certificate. I know it's hard to believe, but everything seemed legitimate at the time. and well, we just thought, you thought I was gone, Vera finished for her. And Diane, my sister. She let you believe that Maggie looked away uncomfortable. Vera could see the hesitation in her eyes, an instinctive doubt that now plagued everything she thought she knew about her own home. She was trying to be kind, but Vera could see the confusion and guilt bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't her fault, not really, but it felt like one more wound on an already bleeding heart. Vera stood up abruptly, her legs shaking beneath her. The sudden movement startled Maggie, who quickly stood up as well, unsure of what Vera might do next. I need to see it. Vera said, her voice tight, almost choking on the words. The paperwork, the deed, the death certificate. I need to see what she did to me. Maggie hesitated for a moment before nodding. Of course. I'll get it. She led Vera to a small desk in the corner of the room where a pile of old files and papers sat. Maggie sifted through the stack, pulling out a manila folder. This is all we have, she said, handing it to Vera. I didn't know what else to do, but I'm starting to think there's more to this than I realized. Vera opened the folder, and there it was, her own name on the death certificate, along with the date of her supposed passing. It hit her like a punch to the gut. Diane had signed her death. She had made everyone believe that Vera was nothing more than a ghost, a forgotten memory. And here it was in black and white proof of her sister's treachery. How long ago did you buy this house? Vera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 16 years ago, Maggie answered. I didn't know any of this until just recently. I never thought to check, and honestly, I didn't even know who you were until now. Vera nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she skimmed through the documents. The ink on the papers looked fresh, the handwriting, so similar to hers, could be mistaken for her own if she hadn't known better. Diane had gone to great lengths to make this look real. She'd known exactly how to manipulate the system. But the question still lingered, why? Why would Diane go this far? Why sell her own sister's life? This isn't just a mistake, Vera murmured, her mind racing. This was deliberate. Diane must have planned this from the beginning. Maggie, who had been watching her intently, stepped forward. What do you mean? She asked, a confused frown crossing her face. I think Diane framed me. She framed me for something I didn't do, and she sold everything I had while I was locked away. She didn't just steal my house, she took my life, my memories, and she made everyone believe I was dead. Vera paused, the anger starting to rise in her chest. But why? What did I ever do to her? Maggie looked like she wanted to say something, but her words faltered. She didn't know. How could she? She had no idea the depth of betrayal Vera had experienced. I need to find her, Vera said suddenly, determination hardening her voice. I need to confront her. Maggie looked alarmed. I don't think that's a good idea, she said, her tone gentle but firm. She's the one who sold you out. She's the one who gave us those papers. But I don't think going to her is going to solve anything. She's the one who took everything from you, but she's also the one who's been hiding. Vera wasn't sure what Maggie meant by that. Hiding where she had to find Diane, confront her, there was no other way. Maggie's discomfort was understandable, but Vera had spent 20 years trying to make sense of her life, and now that she was finally free, she couldn't let this go. I'll figure it out, Vera said, more to herself than to Maggie. I need to know the truth. I need to know why. The room fell silent for a long moment, the weight of their shared words hanging heavily in the air. Maggie watched Vera, her eyes full of sympathy, but also concern. What are you going to do? I'm going to find her. Vera repeated, her voice unwavering. I'll start by tracking down the papers she gave you. and if I have to, I'll go to the police. Maggie nodded slowly, uncertainty clouding her features. I can't help you with that, she said quietly. But I want to, Vera. I really do. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Vera smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. You've already helped more than you know. You gave me the truth. As Vera stood up to leave, she looked around the room one last time. The house still felt like hers in some ways, but it wasn't. Not anymore. Not since Diane had sold it, not since her world had been turned upside down. But there was one thing Vera knew for certain: she wasn't going to let this go. She would find Diane, expose the truth, and take back what had been taken from her. Vera stared at the papers in her hands, the harsh truth sinking in deeper with each passing second. She had always trusted Diane, through all the years, through every moment of hardship and loss. Vera had leaned on her sister, thinking that Diane would never betray her. But this was betrayal on a scale she hadn't even imagined. The woman who had once been her closest confidant had not only sold her home, her memories, but had gone so far as to erase her existence entirely. Sitting across from Maggie Turner in the sterile, too-clean living room, Vera's mind raced. Maggie had left the room to give her space to process, but the silence felt suffocating. Vera had expected confusion, maybe even some denial from Maggie, but the woman had seemed so certain about everything. Diane's betrayal had been buried beneath layers of legalese paperwork and signatures. Maggie didn't know what Vera did, couldn't possibly understand the deep gnawing hurt of being erased by the one person who should have protected her. It wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity, about the truth that had been stripped away. Vera stood up abruptly, her mind racing with questions that didn't seem to have answers. I need to get out of here, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. She couldn't sit in this house, the house that had once been hers, any longer. Not while the truth was still hidden beneath Diane's lies. Maggie, sensing the urgency, rose to her feet as well. Vera, wait. You don't have to go through this alone. Let me help you, she said, her voice calm but insistent. Vera shook her head. No. I have to do this myself. I need to confront Diane. I need answers. Maggie hesitated, glancing toward the door. I get it. I can't imagine what you're going through, but please think this through. You can't just show up at her door without understanding what you're up against. Vera's heart raced at the thought of confronting her sister, of facing the woman who had ruined her life. But Maggie was right. She needed to understand more before doing anything rash. But where to start? Diane had vanished without a trace after selling the house. The last she'd heard, Diane had moved to a place far from Charleston, but no one seemed to know where exactly. I'll track her down, Vera said, her voice hardening with resolve. I'll find her. Maggie nodded, still unsure, but the resolve in Vera's eyes was undeniable. If you need anything, I'm here. Vera barely acknowledged the offer, already lost in her thoughts. She had to find Diane, but the first step was clear: she needed to go through the records Diane had left behind. The deed, the legal papers. They were all there in that folder Maggie had given her. Each document was another reminder of her sister's betrayal. Leaving Maggie's home behind, Vera made her way to a small office in the corner of town, a place she hoped might have some answers. The town clerk's office smelled of old paper and dust, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Vera walked to the counter where a middle-aged woman sat flipping through files. Can I help you? The woman asked without looking up. I'm looking for information on a property, Vera said, her voice low but steady. The address is 2212 Waverly Avenue. I need to know who owns it now. The woman glanced up at Vera, her expression neutral. Give me a minute, she said, then began typing quickly on her computer. The screen lit up with information, and the woman tapped a few more keys before turning the monitor toward Vera. "There you go. The property is owned by a Diana Hartley," she said, pointing to the screen. "But it was transferred over to her from someone named Robert Jacobs." Vera's heart stopped at the mention of Robert's name. Her husband. Her late husband, Robert Jacobs. How had Diane managed to pull him into this? What had she done to him, the woman continued. The deed was filed around 20 years ago. Looks like there was a mortgage attached to it, but that was cleared up shortly after. After that, it was sold to someone else. A family, I think. Vera stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Robert's name on the deed along with Diane's. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Diane had used their names, their history, to cover her tracks. She had taken everything. The house. The memories. And it seemed Robert's name as well. "Can you give me a copy of that?" Vera asked, her voice a little stronger now. The clerk nodded and made a few copies of the documents for Vera. She handed them over silently, and Vera stuffed them into her bag, her thoughts racing. If she could find out where the house had gone after it was sold, she could find Diane. And if she could find Diane, she could finally understand why. As she left the office, the air outside felt heavy, thick with the promise of confrontation. Vera walked the streets of Charleston, her footsteps echoing off the pavement. The town was so familiar and yet so distant. It had changed just as she had changed. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about the house. This was about the years Diane had taken from her, the years of her life that she could never get back. Vera's eyes narrowed with a quiet fury. She would find Diane. She would confront her. But the truth wasn't going to be easy to uncover, and Vera knew that now. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Vera stood at the edge of the pier, staring out at the water. She could see the reflection of the setting sun on the surface, rippling gently with the tide. The air smelled of salt and sand, of the things she remembered from her youth. For a brief moment, Vera allowed herself to remember a time before all of this, before Diane's betrayal, before the years of prison, before the world had turned upside down. She remembered the sound of laughter, of family dinners, of walking hand in hand with Robert along this very pier. She let herself savor that fleeting moment of peace, but deep down she knew the truth was waiting for her just beyond the horizon. As the night began to fall, Vera made a vow to herself. No matter where the truth took her, she would face it. She wouldn't let Diane win. Not again. Vera stared at the stack of papers in front of her, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She'd spent hours digging through every document, every piece of evidence she could find, and yet it felt like she was chasing shadows. Diane had covered her tracks so carefully, so methodically, that it was almost impossible to know where to start unraveling the mess. But Vera couldn't stop. She couldn't let this go, not after everything Diane had done. Every lie, every stolen moment, every memory erased. The deed to her house, the forged death certificate, and the sale of her home. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. But the truth was still just out of reach. Vera had spent the past few days tracking down every lead, every scrap of information she could find about Diane and the house, but nothing seemed to make sense. She had tracked down the names of the new owners, people who had moved in right after the house was sold. But no one knew where Diane had gone after that. Her trail had gone cold. Vera leaned back in the chair, running her hands through her hair. She was tired, more tired than she had ever been. The physical toll of the years in prison had been nothing compared to the mental and emotional exhaustion of trying to piece together a life that had been stolen from her. The woman who had once been her sister, her family, was now a ghost. A cruel, manipulative ghost who had taken everything Vera had ever loved. She sighed and glanced at the clock. It was late, the sun already setting behind the skyline of Charleston, casting long shadows across the room. The city felt so different now, so foreign. Vera had always loved this place, the smell of the ocean, the sound of the seagulls, the way the streets seemed to hum with the pulse of life. But now it felt like a place she no longer belonged. The years she had lost in prison, the life she had missed, it was all too much to reconcile. Her mind wandered back to Robert, the man she had once loved more than anything. He was gone now, but the memories of their time together were still vivid in her mind. They had been happy once, simple but happy. And now in the midst of this chaos, Vera realized that she would never get those moments back. Robert was gone, and the house they had built together was no longer hers. It had all been taken. "Focus, Vera," she muttered to herself, slamming her hand down on the table. She couldn't let herself drown in grief. She had a job to do. Diane had taken everything from her, but Vera was determined to take back what was rightfully hers. She couldn't let her sister win. Just then, the phone on the table buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an unknown number one she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she answered. "Hello." Vera's voice sounded hoarse, unfamiliar even to herself. A woman's voice came through the line, calm but firm. "Ms. Jacobs, I'm Jessica Huang. I've been looking into your case. I think I may be able to help you." Vera sat up straighter, her interest piqued. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to mask the desperation in her voice. "I've been following the trail of your sister Diane Hartley," Jessica said. "I'm a lawyer, and I've been working with a few people who specialize in this kind of case. I believe Diane used some very questionable legal tactics to get away with what she's done. But I need more information." Vera felt a surge of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in days. "I have the papers," she said, her voice shaky with excitement. "The deed, the death certificate, the sale of the house. But I can't seem to find where she's gone. It's like she disappeared." Jessica was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "That's what I was afraid of. Diane is good at hiding, but she's not invisible. We just need to dig deeper. If you can bring me any more documents, anything you've found, we can start to piece this together. I'll help you find her." Vera felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. There was someone out there who was willing to help her, who knew how to calm the legal maze that Diane had created. For the first time in a long time, Vera allowed herself to hope. "I'll bring everything I have," Vera said, her voice firm with determination. "Where can I meet you?" The lawyer gave her an address, a small office in the heart of the city. Vera wrote it down, her mind already working through the next steps. She had a lead finally, and this time it felt like it could take her somewhere real. The next day, Vera arrived at Jessica's office, her heart pounding with anticipation. The building was old, its brick facade worn by time, but the office inside was neat, organized, and clean. Vera walked up to the receptionist and gave her name, and within minutes she was led into a small conference room where Jessica Huang was waiting. Jessica stood up when Vera entered, extending her hand. "Ms. Jacobs, it's good to meet you in person. Please sit down." Vera shook her hand and sat across from her, the weight of the moment pressing down on her once again. This was it, the moment when everything could change. Jessica was her chance to uncover the truth. She had to get this right. "I've brought everything I could find," Vera said, pulling out the stack of papers from her bag and placing them on the table. "These are the documents Diane gave to the new owners. The deed, the death certificate, and some other things." I don't know what to make of it all. Jessica took the papers and began going through them carefully. These documents, they're clean. Too clean, she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's almost as if they were designed to look legitimate, but something doesn't sit right with me. Vera watched as Jessica turned the papers over in her hands, analyzing them with an intensity that only a lawyer could have. What does that mean? Vera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means that Diane likely forged these documents, Jessica said, looking up at Vera. She knew exactly what she was doing. The death certificate is especially concerning. I'm betting that's where the trail really starts. If we can prove that the certificate was falsified, it'll open up a whole new line of investigation. Vera's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the breakthrough she needed. If they could prove the death certificate was fake, everything Diane had done would come crashing down. How do we do that? Vera asked, leaning forward. Jessica smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. We go to the source. We find out where that certificate came from, and we start there. The next morning, Vera sat across from Jessica Huang at a small cafe in downtown Charleston. Her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee, its warmth offering a small comfort against the cold grip of uncertainty. She could still feel the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. Every new revelation made her realize just how deep Diane's betrayal ran and how far the lies had spread. But now, with Jessica's help, she felt like she was finally getting somewhere. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together one by one. Jessica had made a few calls that morning and had come up with something promising. There was a person, a former clerk at the records office, who might know more about the death certificate Vera had uncovered. The clerk had worked during the time when Diane supposedly filed the false documents and had even processed some of the paperwork related to Vera's case. If they could get in touch with him, it might provide the missing link to expose Diane's full scheme. I've set up a meeting with him, Jessica said, looking up from the notepad she had been scribbling in. He's agreed to talk, but we'll need to meet him in person. He's not a fan of speaking on the phone, apparently. But it's a start. Vera nodded, a mix of gratitude and anxiety swirling in her gut. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but if they were going to have any chance of finding Diane, they had to dig deeper into the false documents she had created. The more they learned about Diane's actions, the closer they would be to bringing her to justice. Where are we meeting him? Vera asked, trying to push down the knots in her stomach. There's an old diner on the edge of town near the river. It's quiet, and he said he'll feel more comfortable there. We'll meet him in an hour, Jessica replied, her voice steady. Vera's mind raced. She had been waiting for this moment, the chance to confront the person who had orchestrated her downfall. It felt surreal knowing that Diane's deceit could finally be uncovered, but it also terrified her. Diane was no ordinary criminal. She was cunning, manipulative, and had always been one step ahead. The idea of finally exposing her sister's lies was satisfying, but it also filled Vera with a sense of dread. As they left the cafe and made their way to the diner, Vera's thoughts lingered on the past. She thought of Robert, her late husband, and the life they had once dreamed of building together. He had always been the steady presence in her life, the one person who believed in her no matter what. But even his faith couldn't protect her from the storm Diane had set in motion. When Vera had been locked away for a crime she didn't commit, Robert had fought for her release. But he had died before the truth could ever come to light. Now the only thing left was for Vera to reclaim what had been taken from her piece by piece. The diner was small, tucked away on a quiet side street near the river, with a neon sign that flickered above the door. As Vera and Jessica stepped inside, the smell of fried food and strong coffee filled the air. The place was nearly empty, save for a few old men nursing mugs of coffee at the counter. A man in his late 50s sat in a booth near the back, his face partially hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. He looked up as they approached, his eyes sharp but wary. "You must be Jessica and Vera," the man said, his voice gruff, but not unfriendly. "I'm Tim Barker. I assume you're here about Diane Hartley." Vera's breath caught in her throat. Hearing Diane's name spoken out loud, especially by someone who knew her from the past, sent a shiver down her spine. She had spent so many years fighting to clear her name, to understand how everything had gone so wrong. And now, sitting in front of this man, it felt like she was finally getting closer to the truth. "We are, Jessica," replied her voice calm and businesslike. "We need to know everything you remember about the paperwork Diane filed during that time. Anything that can help us prove the documents she submitted were forged." Tim nodded slowly, glancing around the diner as though making sure no one was paying attention. "It was all so shady," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Diane was the kind of person who could charm anyone. She was good at what she did, too good, really. When she came in to file those papers, something didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The death certificate was the worst part. It was rushed, done in a hurry, but at the time I didn't think much of it. You know, when someone's supposed to be dead, you just process the paperwork. But looking back..." Vera leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean, looking back?" Tim hesitated for a moment, before continuing, his eyes darting around nervously. "Diane came in, said you were dead. Said you'd been gone for years. She was crying, all distraught. But there was something off about it. She was too calm, like she already knew what to do. That death certificate, it didn't add up. The signatures on the document didn't match the ones I'd seen before. And the way she handled the whole thing, it wasn't right." Vera's heart pounded in her chest. Diane had been so careful, so meticulous in her deception. But now they had proof. The man who had witnessed the paperwork being filed was admitting it wasn't legitimate. The walls were closing in on Diane, and Vera could finally see the truth. "Do you still have a copy of that certificate?" Jessica asked, her voice low but firm. Tim shook his head. "No. I'm sure it's long gone by now. But there was one person who might still have a record of it, the county clerk who processed the certificate. She was working there at the time, and she knew Diane well. If anyone has a copy, it would be her." Vera's mind was already racing. "Where can we find her, Tim?" Scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to Jessica. "She works at a place on the outskirts of town, not far from here. You'll have to go in person. She's not the type to answer questions over the phone." Vera felt a surge of determination. The pieces were falling into place, and they were getting closer to uncovering the full scope of Diane's manipulation. It was almost too much to believe. Diane had not only stolen her house and her life, but had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it all seem legitimate. As they left the diner, Vera felt a new resolve building within her. She wasn't just going to clear her name. She was going to take back everything Diane had stolen from her, even if it meant exposing her sister for the person she truly was. The county clerk's office was tucked away in an aging building on the edge of Charleston. The brick structure, weathered and stained by time, seemed to reflect the weight of the secrets it might hold. Vera walked toward it with a mix of anticipation and dread. It had been a long journey to get here, but this was the moment when the truth, at least the part of it Diane hadn't completely buried, might finally come to light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the quiet murmur of voices drifting from behind thick wooden doors. Vera stood in front of the counter, her eyes scanning the space, waiting for someone to acknowledge her presence. An elderly woman, likely in her 60s, looked up from a stack of paperwork. Her expression was neutral, almost bored. How can I help you? The woman asked, her tone flat and uninterested. I'm looking for records on a death certificate filed about 20 years ago. Vera began, her voice steady but betraying a hint of anxiety. It was filed for Vera Jacobs, but I believe it was forged. I need to see the original paperwork. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. A death certificate. You know those records are sensitive. You'll need a lot of paperwork and probably a court order for something like that. Vera swallowed her frustration. She didn't have time to go through the legal hoops. I don't need the whole file. Just the death certificate, please. It was processed under unusual circumstances, and I believe it was falsified. I'm sure you've seen this kind of thing happen before. The woman didn't seem to respond to Vera's plea for urgency, but after a long moment, she sighed, stood up, and shuffled to the back room. Vera's mind raced. If they didn't get to this clerk quickly, the evidence could be lost forever. Diane was smart, too smart, and had likely covered her tracks well. But there had to be something left, some crack in the wall of lies. When the woman returned, she was holding a folder in her hands. She didn't say anything as she dropped it onto the counter, giving Vera a pointed look that clearly suggested she was not happy with the request. I'll warn you, the clerk said, her voice low. If you're looking for trouble, you'll find it with this one. Diane Hartley knew how to manipulate the system. Vera's pulse quickened at the mention of Diane's name. The clerk had spoken the words as though she already knew what Vera was about to find, and that feeling sent a chill down her spine. Thank you, Vera managed to say, barely hearing the woman's words as she flipped open the folder. Inside, the death certificate was tucked neatly among other papers. It looked official at first glance, but something felt wrong. The date on the certificate was wrong, and the signatures, though they seemed legitimate, didn't match the ones Vera had seen before. Her heart pounded. This was it. This was the first real piece of evidence that could bring Diane's lies crashing down. Do you mind if I make a copy of this? Vera asked, her voice trembling slightly as she pushed the papers back toward the clerk. The woman didn't protest. You'll need to sign a request form if you want copies, but I can't give you the original. Vera nodded, but she was already lost in thought. There was no time to waste. If Diane had falsified the death certificate, then everything else had been part of a grand scheme, a scheme to erase Vera's existence and leave her with nothing. After filling out the necessary paperwork, Vera clutched the copies of the certificate to her chest. She had what she needed. She couldn't let the clerk's warning deter her. This was bigger than just a house, it was her life, and Diane had to be held accountable. Once outside, the cool air of the late afternoon hit Vera like a wave, and for a moment, she felt a rush of clarity. She had a lead. She had real evidence. Now the only thing left was to find Diane and confront her. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place, but there was still a long road ahead. Diane's web of lies was intricate, and this small victory would only take them so far. But it was a start. That evening, as Vera sat at a small table in her temporary apartment, she spread out the papers before her. The death certificate lay in front of her, its illegitimacy obvious, now that she had compared it to Robert's original signature. The forged document was a key that would unlock the full story. She stared at the certificate, her mind racing. What had Diane been trying to hide? Had it only been about money, or was there something more sinister at play? For the first time, Vera allowed herself to think of the possibility that Diane had been part of something far darker, something that went beyond just a house and a few stolen years. But what? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She rose quickly, startled by the sudden intrusion. When she opened the door, she was met by Jessica Huang, her lawyer, standing in the hallway, her expression serious. I've been looking through the files you gave me, Jessica said, stepping inside. And I think we may have uncovered something bigger than we thought. Vera's heart sank. What do you mean? Jessica's gaze flicked to the papers on the table. We're not just dealing with a forged death certificate and a stolen house, Vera. Diane Hartley was involved in more than just that. I've been digging through some public records, and it seems like she used that fake certificate to access a substantial amount of money. It wasn't just about the house. Diane used your name to take out loans, investments, and even cashed in on a life insurance policy. This is bigger than we thought. Vera's head spun as she processed the new information. Life insurance, loans, investments. Diane had used her name to take out a fortune, all while she was sitting in prison, locked away and forgotten by the world. Jessica continued, "We need to go public with this. We can't sit on this anymore. But first, I think we need to talk to the police. They'll want to see what we have before we start taking legal action." Vera nodded slowly, the weight of the new revelation crashing down on her. Diane hadn't just stolen her house, she'd stolen her identity, her life, and her future. And now it seemed that there were even more layers to the deception. "I want to do whatever it takes," Vera said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I've spent 20 years fighting for my life. I'm not going to stop now." Jessica gave her a supportive look. "We're going to make sure Diane answers for everything she's done." Vera nodded, standing up from the table. As she gathered the papers, she felt the familiar surge of determination rising within her. Diane had stolen so much, but the truth was finally within reach. The truth about her sister, her betrayal, and the life she had lost. Vera stood in front of the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The house in front of her was as familiar as the back of her hand, yet it felt alien, hostile. It had been years since she'd seen Diane, her sister. The woman who had once shared everything with her dreams, secrets, and their childhood home had become a ghost, a phantom that Vera had to confront now. And with every step she took toward that door, the reality of the situation felt more surreal. She had spent the last several weeks piecing together the mess Diane had left in her wake. It wasn't just about the house or the false death certificate or the stolen life insurance policy. It was everything. It was the lie, the betrayal of blood, the denial of her very existence. Diane had destroyed everything Vera had ever worked for, and now at the threshold of her sister's new life, Vera couldn't help but wonder how much of the woman she thought she knew had ever been real. Jessica stood beside her, a calm, steady presence in the storm of emotion raging within Vera. She was the only one who had been with her through the whole process, digging through old records, unearthing lies, and helping her gather the courage to stand up to Diane. "You don't have to do this alone," Jessica said quietly, her hand on Vera's shoulder. "We've got everything we need. She won't be able to lie her way out of this." Vera nodded, but she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Diane had always been clever, manipulative, and good at twisting the truth to suit her needs. But this time the truth was on Vera's side. It was time for Diane to answer for what she had done. With one last deep breath, Vera knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. The door creaked open, and there stood Diane, her face frozen in a mask of surprise. She looked older than Vera remembered, lines etched into her face, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were the same, cold and calculating. Diane's voice trembled slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Hello, Diane?" Vera said, her voice steady but sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. "We need to talk." Diane hesitated, clearly assessing the situation. I didn't expect you to come here. I thought you would have moved on by now." She stepped back, making room for Vera and Jessica to enter. "Please come in." Vera didn't move. She stayed rooted to the spot, eyes locked onto her sister. No, Diane. I'm not here for tea. I'm here for the truth. The truth you've been hiding for 20 years. Diane flinched, but quickly recovered, a defensive smile playing at her lips. What are you talking about? I haven't hidden anything. You've hidden everything. Vera spat the anger in her voice, making it tremble. You faked my death. You sold my house. You've taken everything I had and used it to build this life. And now, after all these years, I'm here to take it all back. Diane's expression faltered just for a moment before she masked it again. I don't know what you think you know, but it's just too much. I don't know what you want me to say, Vera. I didn't do anything wrong. Vera could feel the rage building inside her, the years of being silenced, of being forgotten, surging to the surface. You lied. You lied to everyone. You made people believe I was dead. You sold my life. And then you tried to cover it up. You've been living off my pain, Diane. Do you think I don't know what you did? For the first time, Diane seemed to falter. Her hand gripped the doorframe tightly, her knuckles white. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. You don't know what I had to do. You were gone. You were dead, Vera. Everyone believed it. I had no choice. I had to move on. I had to survive. You don't know what it was like to be left behind. To be stuck in the mess you left behind. Vera's heart ached, but it wasn't sympathy that filled her chest. It was disgust. Diane's words were self-serving justifications for actions that couldn't be justified. You didn't have to do any of it, Vera said quietly, her voice shaking with emotion. You didn't have to erase me. You didn't have to lie. You could have come to me. We could have worked this out together, but you didn't. You chose to betray me. Diane's eyes flickered a flash of something that might have been guilt before she buried it again, her face hardening. I did what I had to do, Vera. You don't understand. You never will. Vera stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. No, Diane. You're the one who doesn't understand. You thought you could just take everything from me and get away with it. But you're wrong. You're wrong, and now I'm going to make sure the truth comes out. No more lies. No more running. It ends here. Diane opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Vera could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. For the first time in years, Diane was the one who was afraid. I'm not going to let you ruin my life anymore, Vera continued. You've hurt enough people. It's time for you to face the consequences. Just as Vera finished speaking, Jessica stepped forward, her calm presence grounding the situation. We have all the evidence, Diane. The death certificate, the forged signatures, the stolen house. It's all here. It's only a matter of time before this catches up with you. Diane's face went pale as the weight of those words sank in. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was no escape. There was no running this time. You don't have to do this, Diane whispered, her voice now desperate. You don't have to ruin me. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Vera could see the cracks in her sister's facade, the desperation in her voice, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the 20 years of her life that Diane had stolen. I've spent enough years in prison for something I didn't do, Vera said, her voice cold and final. I'm done with you lying to me, lying to everyone. I'm taking back what's mine. Diane didn't respond, her face a mixture of shame and fear. Vera turned toward the door, feeling the weight of her decision settling into her bones. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As Vera stepped outside, Jessica followed her, the two women walking in silence. For the first time, Vera felt a sense of peace, the kind of peace that came from knowing that at last she had done what she needed to do. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and legal paperwork. The confrontation with Diane had been intense, but Vera knew it was only the beginning. With every passing moment, her world shifted. What had been taken from her piece by piece was slowly beginning to return. But the road to justice wasn't as simple as facing Diane in her home. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered about Diane's manipulation. Vera sat in Jessica's office, a pile of documents spread before her. The evidence they had gathered, everything from the forged death certificate to the illicit bank accounts that Diane had used to funnel money from Vera's name, was damning. Jessica had been working tirelessly, piecing together the fraud, and for the first time in months, Vera could see a glimmer of hope. But with the hope came something else, a deep, unsettling realization. Diane had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide the truth, to bury it so deep that even the most meticulous investigation could be led astray. The legal team had advised them to proceed carefully, not to rush into court just yet. They needed to build a rock-solid case, one that would hold up in the face of any challenge Diane might throw at them. But every time Vera picked up the papers, every time she looked at the account numbers and the fake signatures, she felt an overwhelming surge of anger. The woman who had once been her sister, the woman she had trusted with her life, had sold her out in the most intimate way. Diane had taken not just her home, but her identity, her dignity. And while the law might have its own process, Vera couldn't wait much longer. The lies Diane had woven around her life were suffocating. She wanted it all out. She wanted the truth exposed. "I don't know how much longer I can wait," Vera said, her voice tight with frustration, as she ran a hand through her hair. "Every day I sit here, I feel like I'm losing more time. Time I can never get back." Jessica looked up from the papers she was reviewing. "I understand, Vera. I really do. But we can't rush this. If we do, Diane might slip through the cracks again. We have to be strategic. This isn't just about what she did. It's about making sure she doesn't do it to anyone else ever again." Vera nodded but didn't respond. She understood what Jessica was saying. She knew that rushing the process could backfire, that they needed a watertight case. But the longer it took, the harder it became for Vera to keep her emotions in check. Every new discovery about Diane's betrayal felt like a fresh wound, and this wound was one she couldn't just walk away from. "I want to be in control of this," Vera said, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at the papers in front of her. "I want to make sure Diane answers for everything she's done." Jessica paused, then set the papers aside. "We're getting there. We will. Just trust the process. Let the truth come out slowly. We'll get her." Vera nodded, though the words didn't entirely soothe her. She knew Jessica was right, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the weight of the situation grew heavier. The legal team was preparing to go public with the evidence to bring Diane's fraud to light. But Vera wasn't sure how much longer she could wait. The idea of Diane continuing to live her life, while Vera was stuck in limbo, while she was still haunted by what her sister had done, was unbearable. The call came early one morning. Jessica's name appeared on Vera's phone, and her heart leapt into her throat. She answered quickly, trying to mask the urgency in her voice. "Vera," Jessica said, her voice calm but serious. "We've got a breakthrough. We're ready to go public. It's time." Vera's pulse quickened. "What does that mean? Are we going to court?" "Not yet," Jessica replied. "We're going to take everything we've got to the press first. We'll put Diane on blast. We'll make sure the world knows what she's done. It's time to shine a light on everything she's been hiding. Vera's heart pounded. The thought of going public, of exposing Diane's lies for the world to see, felt like a weight lifted from her chest. But there was also a deep fear, a fear of what would happen when Diane was backed into a corner. What would she do? "Are you sure about this?" Vera asked, her voice shaky. Jessica's tone was firm. "It's the only way. We need to make sure that she can't slip away again. We'll release the documents, show the public everything she's done. If we wait any longer, she'll find a way to cover her tracks again. This is it, Vera. This is how we win." Vera closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment when everything would come crashing down. And though she was terrified, a part of her was also relieved. Diane wouldn't be able to run anymore. She would have to face the consequences. "Okay," Vera said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotion flooding her chest. "Let's do it." The press conference was scheduled for the following week. It was the first time Vera had agreed to go public with her story. She knew the risks, knew that the media would be hungry for every detail, every juicy tidbit about the woman who had been locked away for so long and who had now come back to reclaim her life. But Vera didn't care about the press. She didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was the truth. Jessica had arranged for a small conference room where they would present the evidence. Reporters from all over Charleston gathered, their cameras flashing as they waited for Vera to step up to the microphone. Vera felt her hands tremble at her sides, but she squared her shoulders and stepped forward. The room fell silent as Vera began to speak. Her voice was calm, but the weight of her words was unmistakable. 20 years ago, I was wrongly convicted of a crime I didn't commit. I spent my life behind bars, forgotten by the world Vera began. But the truth is, while I was locked away, someone else was living my life. Someone who used my name, my identity, and my family to cover up their own sins. That someone is my sister, Diane Hartley. The cameras flashed again, and Vera could see the reporters scribbling down notes, their attention focused entirely on her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. For 20 years, Diane has been living a lie. She forged documents, stole my home, and used my death to cover her tracks. She thought she could erase me. But she was wrong, Vera continued. I'm here today to make sure that the truth is known. And I'm here to make sure that she answers for everything she's done. The room was dead silent save for the sound of a camera clicking. Vera felt the weight of the truth in the air, and for the first time she felt a sense of power. The truth wasn't just hers anymore, it was the world's. The aftermath of the press conference was a whirlwind. For weeks, Vera's life had been dominated by the media phone calls and the relentless pursuit of a story that had finally caught the world's attention. It was as if the floodgates had opened. The truth was out there now, there was no going back. But with that revelation came something darker, the backlash that only came when someone as carefully crafted as Diane Hartley had been exposed. Vera sat at a small kitchen table, flipping through the papers, her hands steady, but her mind racing. The evidence was in the open now. The press had done their job broadcasting the lies Diane had woven for so long, and people were starting to talk. But despite the overwhelming proof, despite the mountains of documents and testimonies, Diane was nowhere to be found. Jessica had been calling all morning, her voice more urgent than usual. Vera had half a mind to ignore it. She knew what Jessica would say. They needed to take action, keep pushing, keep digging. But Vera felt something inside of her, a deep-set weariness that had settled in after all the chaos. She'd gotten so close to the truth, to seeing Diane exposed for the fraud she was, but the journey was beginning to feel like it would never end. The phone rang again, and Vera finally picked it up. Vera, we have to move fast. Jessica's voice came through sharp and focused. I just spoke with the DA. They've confirmed Diane's been using multiple aliases. She's not just hiding, she's planned an escape. Vera's stomach tightened. So she's on the run, I don't know for sure yet, but everything points to her trying to disappear. We can't let her get away. Vera felt the weight of the situation sink in. It wasn't enough to expose the truth. It wasn't enough to let people know who Diane was. Now they had to catch her, bring her to justice. Diane wasn't going to go down quietly. I've spent 20 years fighting for my life, Vera said, her voice low. But today I'll make sure the truth is louder than the lies. She can't keep running forever. Jessica was quiet for a moment before responding. I'm with you. We're not stopping until she answers for everything. A few hours later, Vera met Jessica at the local police station, where they were briefed on the next steps. The DA had pushed forward with the case, but with Diane on the run, they had little to go on. The most they had were the records of Diane's aliases and the stolen money that had been funneled through multiple bank accounts. The evidence was clear. Diane had orchestrated the perfect escape plan, using Vera's name as collateral, manipulating every system she could find to cover her tracks. But even with all of that, it still didn't feel real. How could someone who was once so close to her, someone she had loved, betray her so thoroughly? Vera couldn't shake the image of Diane's face when she confronted her, how she had tried to justify everything, how she had stood there hiding behind her lies. Do you really think she'll come back? Vera asked Jessica, her voice quieter now. After everything that's been exposed, can she really hide forever? Jessica's gaze softened. She's good at hiding, Vera, but she's not invincible. She can't outrun the truth forever. We just need to keep pushing. Vera nodded, though a cold sense of uncertainty lingered in her gut. The truth was one thing, but bringing Diane to justice was something else entirely. The law had its limitations, its delays, and the more time passed, the more room Diane had to maneuver. But Vera wouldn't let her sister win. Not this time. Days passed, and Vera couldn't shake the feeling that Diane was getting closer, that every minute that ticked by was another minute she was slipping further away from justice. Jessica's calls became more frequent, her updates more frantic. They had tracked Diane's aliases to a remote town in Georgia. The thought of finally confronting her sister again, of seeing her face to face after everything, was almost too much to bear. Vera, we have a lead, Jessica said one afternoon, her voice crackling with urgency. We've found her. Diane's staying in a house in a small town about 2 hours away. The police are on their way to arrest her. We need to be there. Vera's pulse spiked, a mix of relief and dread coursing through her. I'm coming with you. This is it. She's not getting away again. Are you sure you don't have to be there? This is going to be messy. Diane will fight back, Jessica warned. I need to be there, Vera replied firmly. I need to see it with my own eyes. When they arrived at the small, secluded house, the air was thick with tension. The streets were quiet, the town eerily still, as if holding its breath. The police had already set up a perimeter, their vehicles parked strategically around the property. Vera's heart beat in her throat as she stepped out of the car, her legs almost stiff from the adrenaline rushing through her. This was it. This was the end of the road. They approached the house cautiously, the door creaking open in the stillness of the evening. The air smelled faintly of wood and dust, a sense of decay hanging in the air. And there she was, Diane, standing in the doorway, her back to the wall, as if waiting for them. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Vera could see her sister, older, frail, but still with that same coldness in her eyes. Diane didn't speak, but the hatred in her gaze was unmistakable. You think you've won? Diane's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried with it an edge that sent a chill down Vera's spine. You don't know what you're dealing with. Vera stepped forward, her jaw set with determination. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Diane. I'm dealing with a liar, a thief, and a woman who's been running from the truth for far too long. Diane's lips curled into a sneer. You don't understand, Vera. I had no choice. I did what I had to do. Vera's eyes burned with anger, the memories of the years lost to Diane's treachery flooding her mind. No. You chose this. You chose to destroy everything I had. And now it's time for you to face the consequences. The air was thick with tension as the police moved in surrounding Diane's small, dilapidated house. Vera could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat a reminder of the long journey it had taken to get here. This was the moment. The moment when Diane would finally have to answer for everything. The years of deceit, the stolen house, the forged death certificate. All of it had led them to this. Vera stood at the edge of the property just outside the police perimeter, her eyes locked onto the door where Diane had stood moments ago. It was strange seeing her sister again after all these years. Diane hadn't changed much on the outside. She still had that cold, calculating look in her eyes, the same look that had once filled Vera with a sense of unease. But today that look didn't scare her. Today Diane was the one who was trapped, the one who was about to face the consequences. Jessica stood beside her, her voice low but firm. Are you ready for this? Vera took a deep breath, the weight of the question sinking in. She had spent 20 years fighting for her freedom, for her life. She had spent years in prison for a crime she didn't commit, only to have her sister betray her in the worst possible way. But now, standing on the precipice of it all, Vera realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making Diane suffer the way Vera had suffered. It was about closure. I'm not here for revenge, Vera said, her voice steady. I'm here for closure. And for the first time in 20 years, I can choose what happens next. Jessica nodded, giving her a supportive glance before turning her attention back to the house. Vera felt the finality of her words sink in. This wasn't just about finding justice for the lies Diane had told. It was about reclaiming her own story, about making sure that the years she had lost weren't in vain. Diane's manipulation had shattered her life, but it wouldn't destroy her future. As the police began to move in closer, Vera's mind flashed back to all the moments she had lost her husband, Robert. The house they had built together, the life she had imagined for herself. Diane had taken so much, and for so long Vera had allowed herself to believe that it was all gone forever. But standing here on the edge of it all, she realized that while Diane could steal her past, she could never take her future. A uniformed officer approached, his face grim. Vera, he said softly, we've got her inside. She's not resisting, but she's not talking either. Are you sure you want to do this? Vera hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I need to see her. I need to hear her say it. I need to hear her admit what she's done. The officer gave a nod and motioned for her to follow. Vera's heart was heavy as they moved toward the house, but she walked with purpose. The door was cracked open, and inside Diane stood in the dimly lit living room, her arms crossed, her gaze steely. Vera, Diane said, her voice cool, almost bored. I didn't think you'd actually come here. I thought you would have given up by now. Vera didn't flinch. She had heard those words before, Diane's casual dismissiveness, her attempts to downplay the destruction she had caused. But this time, it didn't work. This time, there would be no more running, no more pretending. I'm not here to argue with you, Diane, Vera said, her voice quiet but strong. I'm here for you to face the truth. You've spent 20 years hiding behind lies and deception. But I'm done letting you control the narrative." Diane sneered, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Something that might have been fear, might have been guilt. It was the first crack in her armor that Vera had ever seen. "You think I'm going to apologize?" Diane scoffed. "You think I'm going to admit I was wrong, I did what I had to do. You were dead, Vera. You were gone. And I didn't have time to mourn you. I had to survive." Vera stepped forward, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You didn't just survive, Diane. You took everything from me. You stole my identity, my home, my future. You let everyone believe I was dead. You let me rot in prison while you built a new life off of my name." Diane took a step back, her composure slipping slightly. "You don't understand. You'll never understand what it was like for me." "I understand more than you think," Vera replied, her voice cold. "I understand betrayal. I understand losing everything. But you didn't just take from me. You took from everyone else too. You destroyed our family. You destroyed everything that mattered." There was a long pause. Diane's eyes darted to the floor, and for a moment Vera thought she might break down, might finally admit what she had done. But then Diane looked up, her expression hardening again. "I did what I had to do," she repeated, her voice now a whisper. "You were gone, and I couldn't let myself fall apart. I had to keep going." Vera took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't have to do anything, Diane. You chose to betray me. You chose to destroy my life for your own gain. And now you're going to face the consequences." Diane didn't respond. She just stood there, her face a mask of anger and defiance. But inside, Vera could see the cracks in her sister's facade, the fear that had been hiding beneath all those years of lies. "You can't run anymore," Vera said softly, the finality of her words hanging in the air. "It's over." The courtroom was filled with quiet murmurs as the final chapter of Diane's deception was about to be written. Vera sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the legal team across from her, where Diane sat with her lawyer, her face pale and tight. It had taken months to get to this point, months of interviews, paperwork, and the slow, methodical unraveling of her sister's lies. But now it was all coming to a head. The moment Vera had been fighting for was finally within her reach. The judge's gavel slammed down, silencing the room. "We will now hear the closing statements," he announced, his voice echoing through the room. Vera could feel her hands trembling, but she kept them folded in her lap, steadying herself. This was the moment. This was the day she would finally be able to take back her life, to take back everything Diane had stolen from her. Jessica Huang, her lawyer, stood up and walked to the podium, her posture confident. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jessica began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, we are here not just to seek justice for Vera Jacobs, but to expose the truth. The truth that Diane Hartley has spent decades hiding through lies, manipulation, and the theft of her own sister's life." Vera sat back, listening to Jessica's words, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and anger. She had spent 20 years behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, and now, after everything, Diane was finally being held accountable for her role in that suffering. The thought that Diane had caused her so much pain, so many lost years, still burned deeply. But now in this courtroom, the truth was on display for everyone to see. Jessica continued her words, a sharp contrast to the quiet tension in the room. Diane Hartley not only falsified a death certificate, but also orchestrated a complex web of fraud, stealing Vera's home, her identity, and ultimately her life. She used her sister's name to take out loans, acquire property, and build a life based on lies and deceit. And she did it all, while Vera sat in prison, forgotten, condemned for a crime she never committed. Vera felt her chest tighten. It was hard to believe that everything she had lived through had come to this, that her sister, the one person who should have been her protector, had done this to her. Diane had built a life on Vera's suffering, and it was only now, in the cold light of the courtroom, that the full extent of her betrayal was being revealed. And now, Jessica continued, we have the evidence. The forged documents, the records of the fraudulent transactions, the testimonies of those who saw Diane's manipulation firsthand. This isn't just about money. It's about a sister who betrayed her own flesh and blood. And today we ask for justice. The room fell silent as Jessica stepped back from the podium, her words hanging in the air. Vera took a deep breath, feeling a rush of emotion. She had fought so hard to get here. So many years lost, so much pain endured. But now it was almost over. She would finally be able to move on, to find some semblance of peace. The judge looked over at Diane's defense attorney, who had stood up to deliver his closing remarks. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we ask you to consider the circumstances, he said, his voice smooth and practiced. Yes, my client may have made mistakes, she admits that. But it is important to remember that Diane Hartley acted out of fear, out of desperation. She lost her sister. She had to protect herself, protect her family. We ask for leniency, for understanding. Vera's blood boiled as she listened to Diane's lawyer. Fear, desperation. Was that really how Diane was going to try to justify her actions? She had stolen everything from Vera, and now in the face of consequences, she was trying to claim victimhood. It was as if Diane was still trying to manipulate the world around her even now. The judge turned his attention back to the jury, and the room fell into an even more profound silence. The weight of the case of the lives affected by Diane's actions seemed to hang heavy in the air. Vera could feel the tension building, the final moments of this long, drawn-out journey closing in on them. After what seemed like an eternity, the jury filed out to deliberate. Vera sat in her seat, her mind racing. She knew the evidence was on her side. She knew the truth would win out. But part of her was still afraid that somehow Diane might escape again, that the years of her sister's manipulation might still have the power to twist the outcome. Jessica sat beside her, her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Vera's restless energy. You've done everything you could, she said softly. Now we just have to wait. Vera nodded, but couldn't bring herself to respond. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't calm the storm in her mind. After all that had happened, after everything she had been through, it was still hard to believe that justice would truly be served. The jury returned after what felt like hours, and the room fell into a heavy silence as the foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant Diane Hartley guilty on all charges, she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. Vera felt her heart stop. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing through the courtroom. Guilty. The weight of it, all the years of pain, the betrayal, the suffering, was finally beginning to lift. Diane was going to pay for what she had done. The judge nodded solemnly. The sentence will be determined at a later date, but you will be held accountable for your actions, Diane Hartley. As Diane was led away in handcuffs, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Vera felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't fighting to prove her innocence. She wasn't running from a past that had been stolen from her. For the first time, she was free. Vera stood at the window watching as the sun set over Charleston. The soft orange glow cast long shadows across the street, and the gentle hum of the city filled the air. It was a quiet evening, the kind of evening she used to dream about during the long, lonely years of her imprisonment. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, for the first time in so long, she felt the weight of her past finally starting to lift. It had been months since the trial, since Diane was convicted of the crimes that had upended Vera's life. In those months, Vera had started to rebuild piece by piece, moment by moment. The house she had once called home was no longer hers, but she had found a new place, a small, modest cottage on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered. The pain of the years lost to Diane's betrayal still lingered, but it was no longer the force that defined her. Vera had learned that justice wasn't just about the outcome, it was about finding the strength to face the truth no matter how painful. Diane's actions had stolen so much from her, but in the end, the truth had won, and that truth had set her free. Vera heard a soft knock at the door. She turned, a smile tugging at her lips. She already knew who it was. Jessica had been by her side through every step of the journey, through the investigation, the court case, and the endless battles that had followed. But more than that, Jessica had become a true friend, someone who had helped Vera find herself again. "Hey," Jessica said as she stepped inside, her voice warm and familiar. "How's it going?" Vera nodded toward the small table in the corner where they often sat together and talked. "It's been good. Quiet. I've been thinking." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About everything," Vera said, her gaze drifting back to the window. "About how far I've come. About what Diane took from me and what I've been able to find again. It's strange, you know. All these years I thought my life was gone, that I'd lost everything. But now I realize that no matter what anyone else does, no one can take away who I am. No one can take away my future." Jessica nodded slowly, understanding what Vera meant. "You've come a long way, Vera. I'm proud of you." Vera smiled, the words filling her with a warmth she hadn't known in a long time. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the journey finally settling between them, not as a burden, but as something shared. The room was quiet, but it felt full, the full kind of quiet that comes with peace, not with emptiness. Vera looked down at her hand, noticing for the first time how steady they were. It had taken so much, so many years, so much pain, but here she was, alive and finally truly free. "Do you ever think about Robert?" Jessica asked softly, breaking the silence. Vera's heart tightened at the mention of his name. Robert, the love of her life. The man who had believed in her even when the world had turned its back on her. The man who had fought for her release, who had stood by her when no one else would. He had passed away long before this day had come, but his memory was still with her always. "I think about him every day," Vera said quietly. "I think about what we could have had, the life we were supposed to build. But I know he'd be proud of me, Jessica. He would want me to move forward, to live for both of us." Jessica smiled, a soft and knowing smile. "He'd be proud of you." Vera took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past, not as something that defined her, but as something she had overcome. "I think it's time to start living again," she said, her voice steady. "Not for the past, not for Diane's lies, but for me, for the life I still have." As they sat together in the quiet of the room, a sense of calm washed over Vera. The road to this point had been long filled with uncertainty and pain, but she had finally reached the end of it. And now she stood on the threshold of something new. It wasn't just the freedom from the prison that had held her body captive for so many years. It was the freedom from the emotional prison Diane had built around her. Vera knew that there would be difficult days ahead, that healing wasn't instant, and that there would be moments where the past would try to creep back in. But for the first time, she felt equipped to face it. She had taken back control of her life, piece by piece, and now she would live it on her own terms. "There's still a lot to figure out," Vera said, looking at Jessica with a small smile. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm starting fresh." Jessica nodded, a smile of her own tugging at her lips. "And you're not alone. You've got me, and you've got yourself. That's all that matters now." Vera smiled, feeling the weight of everything she had lost, but also the hope of everything she had regained. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. The years of silence, the years of waiting, the years of feeling like she had been forgotten, they were gone. And in their place, there was a future. Her future. "Home isn't just where you've been," Vera murmured to herself, a sense of quiet realization settling in her chest. "It's where you choose to be, and right now this is where I belong." And as the evening light faded into night, Vera knew she had finally found her place somewhere she had been searching for all along.